Please welcome back to the stage CMO of ConsenSys, Amanda Gutterman.
Hi, who's excited for Ethereal Tel Aviv? We're very excited about it too. It's the first time the Ethereal Summit has gone international. So we are super excited about that, and we hope to be able to host you there. I want to take a moment to introduce our final keynote of the evening. You all know who that is. Our final keynote is Joseph Lubin, a man whose vision, whose leadership, and whose principles have been foundational to building this space and this community. Please welcome Joseph Lubin.
Hello, Ethereal 2047. Thank you all for being here on this ethereal evening of May 11th, 2047, in the great sovereignty of Brooklyn. Every year at the Ethereal Festival, I reflect on what we've accomplished the year before, share milestones and offer thoughts for what the next year might bring. This year, 30 years after Ethereal's inauguration in 2017, instead of doing my usual State of ConsenSys keynote, I wanted to take this occasion to look back, do a retrospective, take stock of where we were at the start of this odyssey, revisit some of the more memorable milestones along the way, and take a moment to be grateful. This is the 30th anniversary of an event that was initially formulated to bring the artists, thinkers, politicians, philosophers, and dreamers into what we then called the decentralized future, and what we recognize today as simply the new normal. And what a great, continually and dynamically regenerative normal it has become. Ethereal Festival this year is the best that I can remember. The talent on display of the artists, music acts, gamers, vid makers, and crypto economists, and the brilliance of all the speakers and panelists eclipses any recent Ethereal week. Amanda, Jesse, and team, brilliantly done, and thank you. Despite being 3 decades in, you are still bringing that youthful excitement and edge to Ethereal. There are 52,391 humans here tonight, and another 303,499 intelligences processing this evening's proceedings. 46,332 of us are telepresent here tonight. 1,193 meat sacks are here in the room. Thank you for joining us in person. Of those of you who transported in, 376 arrived by SpaceX, 1/3 through the atmosphere and 2/3 on the VAC train. And 430 of you live in the metro area. In the hunter-gatherer age, the size of your tribe, your lifelong social network, was less than Dunbar's number of 150. When it gave way to the agrarian age, societies grew larger and required a transformation in how we organize for collective action. Until recently, the trust infrastructure of human society hadn't fundamentally changed since then, some 10,000 years ago. Every modern economic age has been driven by explosive technological innovation, resulting in increased efficiency, throughput, and coordination. Each economic revolution resulted in systems and technologies that raised the quality of life for so many. But all these developments have rested on a single, somewhat weak foundation: the subjective base trust layer of our societies. People need to trust one another in order to do basic things together. Historically, all of the base trust layers in our societies have been founded on subjective trust. Trust in single individuals or interpersonal networks, trust in platforms like businesses and institutions, or trust in large centralized authorities like governments. This works well in many situations, but often breaks down when there's a misunderstanding, information asymmetry, or imbalance of power. Reliance on centralized trust enabled certain kinds of intermediaries to extract excessive value from transaction flows. Rents were extracted largely for imbuing relationships with necessary trust, standing between content creators, service or resource providers, and their customers. In the early 2000s, a movement emerged to redefine the foundation of trust. In 2001, a technology-driven political movement based on peer-to-peer computer networks was triggered by BitTorrent and the Kademlia technology, enabling file-sharing networks to be decentralized. In 2009, with Bitcoin 1.0, when we married the new field of crypto economics with blockchain database technology on peer-to-peer networks, we discovered that maximally decentralized replicated state machines were the key to building a new trust foundation for the planet. If everyone had their own guaranteed accurate copy of what happened and when, nobody could cheat the system. Things kicked into gear in 2014 with Ethereum 1.0, as an initially technological movement blossomed and bore fruit more quickly than we possibly could have imagined. All of this was pioneered first by tech nerds, then served as breeding grounds for next-generation financial tooling and network platform business models, as the decentralized finance and future of work viruses infected the world, or should I say, inoculated it. Decentralized protocols like Ethereum and decentralized crypto economics, in synergy with the open source movement, have enabled us to usher in a new trust infrastructure for the planet, one that anchors the Web3 protocols that secure the P2P economy and the P2M systems, as well as the Web4 M2M protocols, the machine economy, all of which has enabled perhaps the most profound, positive, and rapid transformation in human history, the decentralized trust revolution. Up to the 2030s, our society was run by intermediaries in nearly every industry: monarchs, governments, banks, central counterparties, central points of collection and distribution. These were the entities that controlled the choke points, controlling those points where materials, skills, and information were gathered and meted out, created the bulk of wealth and power. It was usually not the creators and creatives that were able to retain and monetize most of the value created, as they had different kinds of skills and talents. The fabric of society was a tapestry of top-down command and control systems, with gatekeeper intermediaries controlling the interfaces between those hierarchies. Knowing exactly which throat to choke enabled the justice system to function. The age-old subjective trust foundation enabled or necessitated business models that were nearly always fundamentally exploitative, as few business people possessed the integrity to operate them honorably. Today, in the networked platform economy of 2047, where metaphors like which throat to choke are antithetical, such intermediaries no longer need be relied on to imbue transactions with trust. This is handled by the trust platforms themselves. Intermediaries are no longer in a position to extract an outsized portion of the value created. We still have layers of intermediaries populating our open platforms, our value chains, and our transaction flows, but these new intermediaries are creative, add new information, eliminate frictions, and reduce costs. In the age of decentralized trust platforms, the content creators, the resource and service providers, are directly connected to their consumers and are compensated appropriately. Success is less about transactional business skills. Creativity and novel problem solving are rewarded. In the teens and the early 20s, the Web 2 internet companies grew too powerful. Leaders of those companies were called to testify before governments, but to little avail. In a sense, these companies were in their teens themselves, their adolescences, with the hormonal power of unbridled technology coursing through their veins, but without the wisdom to temper the use of it. The technologies they wielded caused them to be nearly ungovernable. They were too strong, brash, and moved too fast, with underdeveloped ethics. These companies were able to monetize bigger and faster than ever before, and they were able to change the rules through lobbying and manipulation of public opinion. This power derived from their control of vast swaths of cultural, social, political, and economic data that we had all sometimes willingly and often unwillingly given them. Social media and early sharing economy companies were particularly effective in this, and in particular, Facebook, Google, and Amazon extracted a large portion of the value online in the world. One modus operandi of Web 2 companies, where Facebook was the poster child, was to offer a service in exchange for our personal information and attention, or just capture that info in normal business operations. They would then plumb and data mine our personal information, linking the data they got directly from us and our devices with information that was acquired elsewhere. This info served to plumpen us up. We were, of course, their product. But it kept getting worse. Data mining, deep learning, deep ad tech, and other techniques enabled these organizations to understand our needs, motivations, weaknesses, and proclivities far better than we knew them ourselves. The most problematic aspect was how app and web interfaces were designed to addict us to that little gush of dopamine into our pleasure centers to keep us scrolling and clicking so we could be sold over and over again for hours. Disorders were created, identified, named, and treated. As individuals, the population was suffering. As a population, the body politic in various Western nations was sick and under attack. We knew how bad it was. We knew it would get worse, but we didn't care. Or more accurately, we weren't able really to care. Our lives, our jobs, our relationships, our health, our stability depended on being connected and staying connected. That was the new normal, the new social fabric. We had to give up our data or give up our lives and livelihoods instead. The economic collapse, American Contagion episode. Oops. Nation-state currencies have taken a big hit since the first Ethereal, with the US Federal Reserve note one of the largest losers, even while the American economy has surged. In 2025, what became known as the American Contagion saw decades of American paper, dollars, and treasuries that had been traded for goods and for foreign goods and services boomerang back on shore, creating a global domino effect that drove a short-lived hyperinflation in the US and other countries. 4 factors caused the contagion: a lack of confidence in the United States as a well-behaved and predictable nation-state actor, loss of confidence in the US dollar, a flattening of the global economy with the emergence of many bilateral trade relations, and the advent of many protocol tokens that could be used locally for day-to-day transactions, but also globally on various industry networks that had global scope. This latter element drove loss of confidence in the petrodollar, and most commodities began to be priced and traded using various tokens on open platforms. Countries didn't need the US dollar anymore in its role as a reserve currency. Dollar weakening and lack of demand for treasuries drove a breathtaking downward spiral. Things were touch and go in the American economy and global economies for over 2 years. But the open platform networks and peer-to-peer economies that had been built over the previous few years were decently enough established to emerge and enable us to weather the storm and evolve old economic structures into new, more sustainable ones. By 2026, Western democracies were on the brink of collapse. This was a crisis that made the issues of 2007 and 2008 and the Great Recession seem like a head cold. By the end of that year, the Fed had stabilized the dollar. Forward thinkers at the St. Louis Fed, having predicted the contagion, had convinced the US Treasury to stockpile different open platform tokens in the preceding years. They constructed a strong, diverse portfolio, which grew tremendously in value once the US dollar began to falter, taking most of the Western currencies with it. The St. Louis Fed put the playbook together, and they were the ones who ran the CCT, the Contagion Crisis Team. The CC team had the US Treasury Department also purchase tokenized real assets and actively tokenize many real assets in their portfolio, from real estate to agricultural and metals commodities to crude oil and kilowatt-hour tokens on spot futures and options markets. Robofolios continually and automatically tranched, securitized, and traded treasuries and other government bonds that flooded the market over the year of the contagion. Those assets were massively discounted in the largest dynamic write-down in global history. Historically, such a profound economic shift and necessary dislocation in broad asset prices due to the paradigm shift could only have resulted in a war. 2 years before the contagion, the St. Louis Fed had driven the launch of FedCoin. FedCoin was in use at the time for payments among government organizations and by some businesses that worked with the government. During the contagion, the CCT activated bridges from FedCoinNet to Ethereum and other platforms. The CCT strengthened the currency by sponging up the sea of inflated USDs from the legacy banking system, trading FedCoins for USDs and then retiring the USDs. The FedCoin was then renamed the US dollar, and it could roam beyond FedCoinNet. The US Treasury declared that the new natively digital US dollar would be backed by a basket of tokenized digital and physical commodities, and that 1 USD could always be atomically exchanged for 1 unit of the commodity token basket. The American contagion ended up being a blessing. Even under stress and scrutiny, the networked economy proved sufficiently developed, scalable, and resilient to rapidly absorb many of the agreements and commercial flows that still resided in the legacy economy. The open law technology and platform enabled people to rapidly convert existing agreements into natively digital forms and to form new commercial agreements on network platforms with virtually none of the friction and expense formerly due to the lawyerly class. Those organizations that could not adapt fast enough were swept away by the hyperinflation. This was the moment when network platforms and topical global villages began to emerge as a powerful economic and political force. Broad network platforms like those for commodities trading, shipping, education, entertainment, gaming, and travel are where we spend the bulk of our professional and leisurely hours, though for many, these are nearly one and the same. Topical global villages are the places we pursue more focused interests. People could now organize effectively and trustfully, not according to physical proximity, but by opting into common pursuits and interests. Over the years, the many network platforms and topical global villages of which each of us are members, from CancerNet, which has nearly eradicated that scourge, to the Solarius platform, which has produced more prose, art, music, games, long and short-form video than any entertainment franchise in history, have rapidly reshaped society and have decisively addressed long-running problems such as disease, poverty, and slavery, problems governments were not properly configured to address. Decentralized systems' broad governance based on trust infrastructures and human swarm intelligence have proven to be the most powerful social force this planet has yet seen. They have enabled near-instant analysis of situations with crowd wisdom, sourcing of solutions with group intelligence and creativity, and system building in real time to solve problems quickly. This is the foundation of the global collective capitalist economy that has resurrected the Western liberal democracies and is making unifying inroads in the East. Emergence of radical governments. As far back as the first Brexit vote, many countries experienced nearly a decade of installation of radical political parties, leaders, and regimes. We fell prey to fake news, information silos, and bifurcation mindsets. This became clear during the Cambridge Analytica attacks and related abuses, during which Facebook and other social media platforms were proven to have been co-opted as weapons of mass manipulation. These companies enabled the transmutation of freedom of expression, long protected under Western regimes, into our most exposed vulnerability. Constructed by social media and reinforced in echo chambers, opinions were rendered as objective fact in black and white, and polarization grew entrenched. Polarizing narratives were architected to sow bitter animosities. The journalism industry had been consumed, eaten alive by the advertising technology sharks. Social media deployed an age-old business model. They addicted the population so they could profit off their backs. Presenting balanced viewpoints and fostering critical thinking was anathema to that business model. The result was devastating. In terms of polarization, things grew darkest towards the end of the second Trump administration. Hate crimes skyrocketed globally, long-standing international relationships faltered, worldwide radical groups arose on either side of issues to defend morals that were packaged and served to them by media and advertising companies. In 2026, Senator Jon Stewart famously declared, "Journalism is dead." We had almost arrived at the future Tim Berners-Lee so presciently feared, one in which people dug themselves into a cultural pothole so deep that when they eventually physically met a real person on the street, the lack of common understanding will be total, and the only form of communication left will be to shoot them. The changing tide, the removal of toxicity, and the proper nourishment for the body politic. In early 2007, a path towards recovery emerged. Facebook, finally admitting its role in the wave of global radicalism fomented by fake news and information echo chambers, turned on a dime and deployed radical news verification methods. It would soon follow on with even more radical departures from its adolescent past. Before that, platforms like Civil triggered the recovery of the journalism industry, especially local journalism, which had suffered the most. Civil media brought sustainable business models back to local and topical journalism, all in a context of renewed ethics. Ethics with respect to the truth and ethics with respect to the nature of facts. In contrast to the era of truthiness and fake news on the civil platform, facts are facts, and where there is room for interpretation, anyone can drill down to understand probabilities and origins with respect to data, and provenance with respect to opinion. An explicit network of interests and potential conflicts of interest accompanies the provenance of every opinion. The Civil Foundation galvanized academics, journalists, and experts in governance into building a global community that maintains standards on how the news is reported. Divorcing news delivery from the influence of advertising dollars was the breakthrough that enabled the sustained turnaround of Western liberal democracies. It started by establishing best practices, evolved into defining classes of journalistic reporting that should be protected from deep advertising technology, and eventually won the support of lawmakers. It would be fair to say that the Civil platform helped journalism evolve beyond the spoon-feeding of the naive population of the 20th century and beyond its barbaric adolescence in the first couple of decades of the 21st. We emerged from the polarity and unrest of the 20s with what can now be considered a mature, regularized, and systematized social function that helps us understand the social, moral, and political context in which we are all embedded. We're now able, as a society, to engage in direct democratic decision-making because of it. Political truth or action is no longer a singular top-down expression of the majority, poorly fitting many groups with different needs and opinions, but a bottom-up and emergent phenomenon that serves each smaller group's needs and that is as subtle as it is strong. The topical global village is the most coherent political construct since the hunter-gatherer tribe. The FAANG consortium. After the Brexits, Trump 1, and especially Trump 2, evidence was overwhelming that social media had been weaponized by nation-states and globalist actors to weaken otherwise healthy communities and strong trading relationships. Liberal democracy was on its deathbed. Seeing the writing on the wall and bowing to nation-state and consumer pressure, in 2017, Mark Zuckerberg pivoted his company nearly 180 degrees, splitting Facebook Inc. into Facebook Media, an entertainment and advertising technology company, and into OpenBook, or Book, a protocol-based open platform on which Facebook and other media companies could deliver content. Everyone on Book was able to claim their decentralized IDs, as specified by the Decentralized Identity Foundation, to serve as the root of their identity tree. ConsenSys was a founding member of the DIF back in 2017. Facebook joined in 2015. This was the first time at large scale that our identities and personal information came fully under our control. People and organizations around the world established their persistent root IDs, often with ConsenSys as viewport, And personal data lockers like 3box enabled people to protect their personal information, but also publish, share, and monetize it if they wished. The split of Facebook into a media company and an open network platform, and the goodwill it attracted for its open source work, piqued the interests of other global tech giants. By 2033, Zuckerberg announced the creation of DFAANG, the Decentralized FAANG Consortium, an homage to the acronym that defined the exploitative monoliths of the platforms and companies, including the evolved Web 2 mainstays, Facebook Media, Book, Google, Twitter, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, and many ConsenSys mesh companies. The DFAANG Consortium today sets standards and coordinates interoperation of decentralized open network platforms. With everything moving to programmable open platforms, DFAANG enabled CEOs to shift their business models to incorporate open protocols to invite and grow developer mindshare and promote interoperability. Transportation, appliance, travel, festival, entertainment, and gaming companies all banded together into industry platforms and cross-industry platforms to promote fluid interoperation. Treating vast swaths of public data as a public good rather than competitive advantage followed. And data from state-controlled sensor devices, formerly the all-seeing eye Big Brother networks, is now free to access. The DFAANG Consortium promoted three principles: standardization, digitization, and tokenization, which enable all of the network platforms and topical global villages to interoperate. Standardization and digitization were applied to streamline the representation of all financial contracts. DFAANG standardized the open source framework the world currently uses to represent and process nearly all financial instruments and financial flows. Many of us know it as ACTUS, the open source algorithmic contract types unified standards framework. Through the ACTUS standard and the AFP, the ACTUS financial protocol, the HTML and HTTP of the financial web, enterprises began overcoming the walled garden inefficiencies of the previous decades, which confined companies and markets to proprietary siloed systems. ACTUS introduced a financial contract type taxonomy. Every financial contract on the planet can be represented as one of the 37 categories of contracts with well-defined inputs, outputs, and algorithms to codify the flows of value, each rendered and encased in a legally binding open law smart agreement. Financial analysis and planning became far more regularized. Today, we can not only compare a mortgage to any other mortgage, but we can compare it to any annuity or bond or futures, option or swaps contract using the unified framework. Tokenization, the third core element, supercharged standardization. It enabled us to render all assets in natively digital form, and it created economic incentives to standardize all forms of asset representation and processing. Tokenization brought the invention of natively digital assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum and the many storage, bandwidth, and compute assets of Web 3. It also brought native digital representation of real-world assets like real estate, equities, commodities, and identity. Tokenization enables us to clear and settle any transaction in the instant of the transaction, regardless of what the underlying elements are. Thus, tokenization has enabled us to squeeze the frictions and delays out of all of our transactions and has removed most opportunities for fraud. Tokenization can represent assets like identifiers, like the blockchain-based root of my decentralized identity tree, and rights, privileges, and capabilities, like the ability to access a service or a piece of information. This has enabled the capabilities-based framework of Web 4.0, pioneered by Agoric and MetaMask. These teams created the first coherent security model for the web, taking us from a web architecture that was formed in naive times to trade academic papers to the rock-solid data and IoT security model that undergirds nearly all information processing on the planet. I call it the Star Trek computer model, since anyone, anywhere can access their resources and fluidly share resources via a variety of interfaces. Zuckerberg, who has remained at the helm of the DFAANG Consortium since its inception, has been one of the staunchest and most articulate advocates for consumer data protection and privacy. His United Nations address in the second year of the consortium's existence, laid out not only the tenets of decentralized identity and personal data protection, but also the framework for how any kind of public data could and should be captured, attributed, described via meta information, and made available to anyone on free market platforms for open data. Wallets, points of sale, and intelligent agents. We've entered an era of established trust between organic and machine intelligences. The architecture of our shared infrastructure has empowered all to act and transact with confidence. M2M, the machine economy, is growing fast with an effective global swarm intelligence whose deep underlying complexity we experience as increasingly intuitive. Information flows are open and transparent, 100% so for autonomous machines, and consistently moving higher on the human side. Supply chains are managing resources optimally, feeding the just-in-time and 3D printing networks. Deep learning, blockchain, and tokenization have reached a symbiotic harmony to make our lives more instant and enriched than ever, and fully under our personal control, even as levels of collaboration and interdependence have reached new highs. We find it effortless to acquire what we need these days, nearly anywhere in the world. I concentrate on what I want or need, and my Siri, yes, I still call her Siri, Siri detects event potentials that my cranium puts out, patterns that she and I negotiated 15 years ago. Then she goes into the market and completes a transaction on my behalf. It can be a banana that I grab on the spot, or it can be a pair of shoes droned to me in minutes. It is so smooth these days that we don't think about the underlying complexity. Money has taken so many forms over the millennia, from huge rocks to small gems and beads and notches on sticks. The more modern ages saw us use disks of metal, printed paper, and entries in centralized databases. This all seems laughable at this point, given how flimsy and counterfeitable all those implementations were. It is hard to remember the time before programmable money. Rich new economies have emerged around digitally native representations of value, and as our basic needs are getting to be largely met around the world, radically new asset classes like attention, education, environment, personal health, social health, now trade within their own interlinked network economies. We are more interested in accumulating attentional and educational wealth than in stockpiling wheat or kilowatt-hour tokens. More interested in trading and growing the value of social health assets in our global villages than making killings in equities markets. Money per se has taken a back seat in the network platform economy, as a tokenized everything world no longer requires explicit means of exchange to facilitate commerce. Before, all the different kinds of assets had to be traded using different interfaces on different markets under different rules. Now, because all smart token forms are standardized, I can trade, clear, and settle that banana Siri bought for me for any of the tokens in my wallet, be they commodity, protocol, equity, or event admission tokens. We've seen an amazing shift in the nature of work since assembly lines and working for the man in our cubicles. In a remarkably short period of time, the nature of work, the structure of markets, the prosecution of governance, the self-sovereignty of individuals, the architecture of economies, and the freedom and agency of the vast majority of people on this planet have evolved and matured profoundly. In the early 21st century, the structure and nature of the firm had not yet caught up to the information age. Health benefits, insurance, retirement savings, and education benefits were all secured through the employment relationship in exchange for spending most of our waking hours in service of our employer. Automation, the gig economy, and data asymmetry threatened the security of workers across industries, eroding the social contract between employer and employee that had reigned through most of the industrial age. With the advent of blockchain technology and platforms like Sobel, OpenLaw, Coven, Opolis, Bounties Network, and Gitcoin, we initiated the era of the self-sovereign worker, where peer-to-peer economies and tokenization of everything have empowered the individual to be self-sufficient and selective in finding work on open global platforms rather than in limited geographies and under constraining relationships. With Opolis, we saw the advent of the guild-like DEO, decentralized employment organization, in which networks of self-sovereign workers organized collectively via a trusted protocol to manage self-determined employment and portable benefits. Realized as a second-generation DAO, these DEOs were among the earliest topical global villages, as groups of workers saw the clear benefit of aligning capital and labor incentives among their like-minded peers in an era of increasingly uncertain traditional prospects. DEOs served as one of the strongest catalysts that ushered in the era of collective capitalism. We can think of the trust revolution as a paradigm shift in our species' management of our shared resources. Open shared platforms are natural. We live with them daily. The ground is a transportation layer that we can all walk on. The air we can all freely breathe. Public parks enable us to gather and play together. And in oceans, lakes, and rivers, we can swim and fish for food. Our digital infrastructures, too, are common goods that, at their best, enable us to better manage our resources in a state of abundance and take good care of the pale blue dot where the human story began. Just as steam power and mechanical assist force multiplied what we could do with muscle alone, enabling us to do more, better, faster. Just as computation machines expanded what we could contemplate and execute. Just as the internet and social networks of yesteryear magnified our gregarious nature, enabling us to coordinate globally in real time, the revolution in the global trust infrastructure, enabled by maximally decentralized blockchain and related protocols, force multiplies everything we do in the age of automated trust. This economic evolution has not only enabled us to create orders of magnitude more value in less time, but has transformed the very concept of value itself. At Ethereal BK 2019, I spoke of the germinating roots of collective capitalism, proposing that the coordination and incentive aligning features of decentralizing technologies, that with the coordination and incentive aligning features of decentralizing technologies, we could, for the first time in history, empower both individual and collective interests in parallel. Free markets and shared ownership were no longer in tension. The paradigm shifted decisively from Byzantine and hierarchical to collaborative and fractal, from classical models to complex systems. Whereas scaling any industry used to require high coordination costs to produce energy, and therefore high socioeconomic entropy, decentralized coordination has enabled complex social systems to manage resources and processes more effectively and seamlessly, while affording individuals greater autonomy to determine the nature of their participation. This embracing of complex models, the holistic organism rather than the command and control organization, was a key aspect of evolving the rather simplistic technological optimism of the early blockchain era. As in any emergent process, technological change and social change are part of the same feedback loops, some negative, some positive. Removing silos, barriers, and trust asymmetry from digital information flows has enabled lower friction interactions across global networks. When we began to spread not just information across these global networks, but also the other interactions that have advanced our species during each era of our history, labor and wages, ownership, financing, production, markets, data, we became a holistic global organism. And having graduated from adolescence and reached a state of still youthful maturity, we're taking steps to project our species and our civilization beyond this pale blue dot to the moon, Mars, and beyond. Back at the first Ethereal Summit in 2017, I said, I've heard so many times, almost daily over the past few years, that people are working to change the world. These days, we don't hear people talking about changing the world, just like we don't hear people talking about breathing or walking. It's just what we do all day, every day. There's a new energy that continually sweeps over the planet. It is like a continuous rolling wave of creativity unleashed by better, fairer, more equitable systems. Systems that enable and empower us to access the information we need in real time to pretty much always make our own best decisions. The planet is now largely focused on novelty and excellence rather than competition and survival. We are firmly ensconced in an abundance mindset, having shed the fear and scarcity ethos, the survival mindset that nearly killed us. Liberated from scarcity economics, endless creativity, and virtual digital property and value enables the creation of literally infinite wealth. In the 30 years since we first began to imagine together a new way to organize ourselves and architect our intentional evolution towards a holistic collective culture, I can say with confidence that the dream has been made real, and we are all in it. Thank you.